Now, the first issue of our conference today is about the European Union and its neighbors. We have asked three speakers to give introductory remarks. Andrej DANKO, President of the Slovak National Council, Nikos VOUTSIS, President of the Hellenic Parliament, and Roberto FICO, President of the Italian Chamber of Deputies. The keynote speakers have 8 minutes each for their deliberations, and then we'll have a debate following which the keynote speakers will have another 4 minutes for their replies. First of all, let me give Mr. DANKO, the President of the National Council of the Slovak Republic, the floor.
Ďakujem. Excelencie, vážené dámy.
Your Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, let me start by thanking the President of the Austrian National Council, an incredible person, Mr. Wolfgang Sobotka, for his invitation. Today's conference, in my opinion, is extremely important as it facilitates interparliamentary dialogue targeting specific and topical European matters. Intensified dialogue of national parliaments delivers substantial added value to the predominantly intergovernmental cooperation within the European Union. European neighborhood policy should be a key element of European foreign policy. The security situation in our neighborhood is less predictable than it used to be. Numerous regional conflicts and crises require our attention and endeavor to resolve them. Ensuring neighborhood stability is the main and currently the most pressing challenge faced by the European Union and individual partner states in regions to the east and south of our external borders. It is a challenge in terms of security as well as economic development and illegal migration. Our prime goal must be to strengthen prosperity, stability, and security of all stakeholders, reflecting the ambitions of our partners, which ultimately ensures a stable, secure, and prospering European Union. I am sure that all would agree that the southeastern region of Europe, in terms of civilization and history, belongs to the territory covered by the European Union and constitutes its inherent part. We believe that EU enlargement is a strategic investment in stable, strong, and united Europe. We consider EU enlargement to be a policy of priority. We need to convey a clear and persuasive signal of fellowship, cohesion, and shared future vision to the countries in the West Balkans. That is an imperative. In this respect, I welcome that North Macedonia, after 27 years, achieved a historical breakthrough in its relations with Greece, thus molding a new positive situation not only for itself but also for other countries in the West Balkans. A clear prospect of EU membership based on shared values and observance of common standards is the best motivation for further pursuit of reform and modernization processes in these countries. Should the European Union fail to make use of this strategic opportunity to integrate West Balkans, it would be opening yet another door to security threats, instability, and undesired external influences throughout the region, the importance of which is well known to other strong international actors. Our hesitation and unclear signals towards countries of this region will encourage these actors as they will interpret them as signs of our weakness. Enlargement is a structured process, including inter alia assessments of the progress achieved. Without taking on board our values and standards, no country can become an EU member. But it seems to me that in the recent years, the entire process became somewhat too technical, and its political dimension faded away. During my visits in Serbia and Montenegro, I used Slovakia as a case study describing how complex the path into the EU had been, but we made it. So if our partners persevere in their reforms, at the end of the road, they can expect security, more jobs, social certainty. The Slovak Republic is a strong supporter of the countries of West Balkan in pursuit of reforms. And in the implementation of the projects aimed at strengthening institutional capacities of parliaments to better adjust to the accession process, we involve joint activities of the V4. This applies to both the West Balkans and countries of Eastern Partnership. And this also implies extended formats with EU partners and partners of the region. Truly, what we need to do today are exactly such specific activities with tangible reform results. The 10th anniversary is really an opportunity to introduce more dynamics. Today, we have made progress in bilateral cooperation with all countries of the region. However, the overall situation, particularly due to the ongoing conflicts, remain to be extremely complex. On the one hand, we uphold our commitment to support our partners. On the other, we expect of them deep reforms and recognition of values and principles which are the bedrock of EU. So today what we need is a realistic assessment of the progress made to date. But even more important is to look beyond the 2020 horizon and decide how to proceed in the next decade and what we really want to achieve with regard to the countries of Eastern Partnership. And to be fair, we must admit that the Eastern Partnership Program has become a multi-speed program. As we read the political reality in the EU, apparently a membership perspective is currently not in the sheet of notes. But between association agreements on the one hand and membership perspectives on the other, there is quite a lot of room for political creativity. In today's globalized world, when pursuing our neighborhood policy, we have to take into consideration the broader international context. The entire world is constantly changing, and it would be just idly standing by would be gross negligence on our part. On the international scene, we witness growing ambitions of global players with whom we can compete only if the European Union stands strong and united. To this end, the adoption of the global strategy on foreign and security policy of the EU, redefining our objectives at the global level, that is a positive step. Slovakia was in the ranks of the supporters of this strategy. That is the need to interconnect internal and external security. We need a European Union that plays a key role in global policy, including security and defense that reflects its economic power. We must adopt measures facilitating our defense capability and conducive to strengthening our joint European military capacities. To this end, when referring to cooperation of armies is the example of the Benelux states. One of the greatest security threats in Europe today is terrorism. We need to focus on direct combat and elimination of terrorists and fundamentalists. Yes, yet at the same time, we must effectively tackle the root causes of such radicalization, such as failed integration and insufficient education. Raising awareness of positive European values is inevitable. Today, we have convened here on the soil of our Austrian friends, and therefore, here and now, I want to point out a specific approach, namely protection against radical political Islam that is spreading as a scourge throughout Europe. Such approach and policy would alleviate radicalization tendencies in Muslim communities, and truly European values and Europe's security must always come first. Hand in hand with that comes the need to seek models and possibilities of reconciliation and tolerance. And the promotion of interreligious dialogue should be an essential part of that, especially if we bear in mind that a large proportion of the citizens of associated countries are our Muslim brothers. And when referring to neighbors, we refer also to what surrounds us, our communities. This way, we have to create a tolerant environment by reconciliation, by a dialogue based on reconciliation, which is conducive to elimination of radical elements. Pope Francis demarked a possible trajectory by the historically first visit of a pope of the Arab Peninsula. In Abu Dhabi, various initiatives have been fueling interreligious reconciliation. The Arab Emirates have been for the last few years underscoring common values that are shared by all religions. They join them rather than divide them. And common fundaments of Christianity and Islam are a cornerstone. Religion per se is not a danger, but fanatized religious extremists are. Another important topic in the field of security is the digital agenda, and that covers all of its aspects. That is from the establishment of a single digital market, the division of universal rules in the digital space, cybersecurity toolbox, up to the taxation of revenues generated by digital businesses. Other global challenges such as instability, illegal migration, global climate change, deterioration of the environment demand global solutions in which the European Union must hold one of the pivotal roles. We, that is the EU, ought to strive for well-functioning international institutions and the observance of applicable regulations which constitute the pillars of an enhanced global order. Dear colleagues, by way of conclusion, I am confident that the European neighbourhood policy, as well as the new Commission that emerges from the May EP elections, shall have a stronger strategic drive, be more flexible, consistent, and cohesive, because the European Union needs precisely that kind of policy towards our neighbours and the neighbours of their neighbours. Brexit will be truly a great exam for all of us. Brexit has been sucking out of all of us a lot of energy for the last few months, but I'm sure that jointly we will be able to tackle these issues. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrej DANKO. This was a very wide range of subjects which you covered. And certainly this is a subject which will be highlighted by many of us. And I would now like to give the floor to the Speaker of the and the President of the Hellenic Parliament, Mr. VOUTSIS, and you have the floor. It's 8 minutes for you.
Dear colleagues, having been asked to intervene today on the item, the EU and its neighbours, I'm particularly happy to be in a position to refer to a very good example of good neighbour relations, the Prespa agreement between Greece and North Macedonia, our neighbour. Before me, I have Mr. Zaferi, in fact. It is precisely Greece's commitment to the consolidation and prosperity of southeastern Europe and our sense of responsibility towards European integration in this region that have led to this agreement. We have proven that when there is the necessary political will, states are able to peacefully resolve their differences based on international law and good neighbor relations. The agreement creates the proper framework to fully develop our bilateral political and economic relations with North Macedonia to the benefit of our two peoples. Already our bilateral relations at all levels are frequent and close and aim to establish a full and modern nexus of cooperation. Last week, the Greek Prime Minister was in Skopje, accompanied by 10 ministers, and he participated in the first meeting of the High Cooperation Council between the two countries, while various memoranda were also signed. At the same time, the agreement paves the way for the Euro-Atlantic and European perspective of North Macedonia. Furthermore, the impediments to cooperation are lifted and the opportunity is provided to southeastern Europe to take advantage of development initiatives such as the Chinese One Belt, One Road one and the U.S. plans and the European plans for the economic and energy sector in the region. The significance of this agreement has been recognized by the sum of the international community, first and foremost the EU, and I would like to thank you very much, dear colleagues, for your own encouraging stance. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, the rapid integration of the Western Balkans in the EU remains a consistent priority for our country for regional stability, as well as EU security and economic growth in the region. Greece supports the principle that the pace of the accession process for each candidate or potential candidate country of the Western Balkans should be based on the progress each country has made separately in order to maintain a strong incentive to push forward the necessary reforms. At the same time, the EU, all of us, we need to implement a renewed strategy that will include policies of aid and convergence with these countries so that we don't create a hazy future or any perspective of turning the Western Balkans into a special economic zones where there will be the flourishment of a neo-colonial type of exploitation. Our neighborhood is not only the Western Balkans, of course, nor just our relationship with our neighbors limited only to the enlargement process. The EU has adopted an active neighborhood policy with the aim to promote stability and prosperity in the regions around us, by enhancing political and economic reforms. This year, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Eastern Partnership. In a constantly changing Europe, we need strong, resilient, and democratic neighbors, and we must indeed encourage and egg our Eastern partners on to remain committed to the ongoing reforms. The Eastern Partnership must harmoniously coexist with the southern dimension of the European neighborhood policy. Due to its unique position at a geographic and cultural crossroads between north and south, east and west, Greece attaches special significance to the southern dimension. And we exercise policies that take into advantage all of the tools that the EU neighborhood policy provides for us. Dear colleagues, in the same spirit, let me let you know that Greece has established regional cooperation schemes both in southeastern Europe as in the Eastern Mediterranean. In the Eastern Mediterranean, in cooperation with Cyprus, our colleague Mr. Silouris is right here. So with Cyprus, Greece, showing consistency and realism, invests politically in the emergence of a new security architecture through trilateral cooperation with Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine. At the same time, Greece supports enhancing the Union for the Mediterranean as a useful forum to strengthen our relationship with our southern neighbors and our support synergies with other regional structures of cooperation where Mediterranean issues are being discussed. But beyond the enlargement process and the neighborhood policy, I would like to stress that the overall international actions of the EU as a global power for stability and peace must be guided by the promotion of peace and in a consistent way of the respect for international law, the protection of the rule of law and human rights, and the strengthening of growth for the principles that lie at the foundation, at the heart of our union. As a natural consequence, the management of refugee and migrant flows caused by conflicts, especially in countries that are close to us, must be consistent with the above-mentioned principles and in line with international law and the principle of solidarity. You know very well, whether you admit it or not, that in the effort of Greece and other countries, we did not always receive the expected solidarity from all our European partners. Let me say that the allocation of burden sharing has not been fully implemented by all member states. Burden sharing and responsibility sharing. So I should point out that we need to reform the common European asylum system on the basis of solidarity and fair burden allocation. I couldn't possibly conclude a speech on the EU and its neighbors without mentioning shortly our neighboring Turkey, an important EU partner in many fields. Greece has unfailingly supported Turkey's European perspective as it considers that it is to the EU's benefit, to the benefit of the Turkish people, but also to the benefit of Greece. Turkey and the EU must remain committed to the continuation of an open and frank dialogue on substantial fields of common interest, such as migration, fighting terrorism, energy, transport, and trade. It goes without saying that the European path of Turkey is linked to the principle of conditionality, which does not limit itself to internal reforms and the necessary rule of law, but it extends also to foreign policy and to respect for international law, including the international law of the sea. Thank you very much.
Ich bedanke mich recht herzlich auch für die große.
Thank you also for your discipline as regards the time allocated to you. And let me commend again the Greek commitment in the region, which you also have pointed out. This is also appreciated very much on a European level. Let me now give the floor to the President of the Italian Chamber of Deputies. You have the floor, sir.
President.
Dear Presidents Sobotka and Ape, dear colleagues, let me first of all thank the two houses of the Austrian Parliament for the excellent organization of this conference. The neighborhood policy is of crucial importance to address some of the major global challenges that Europe is confronted with: migration, energy, climate, terrorism, transnational crime, the competitiveness of our economy, stability and security, both internal and external, democracy, and the rule of law. The sheer scope of these challenges makes the action of individual countries structurally inadequate. It requires shared awareness and a common response. Therefore, in our relations with neighboring countries and in its external action, the Union should be capable of upholding a united and consistent stance and to assert its fundamental values and principles. We must recognize, colleagues, that this was not the case so far, as is graphically shown by, for example, by relations with the southern shore of the Mediterranean with respect to migration flows, conflict areas, and all the issues pertaining to respect for human rights and democratic transition in our southern neighbors. In this connection, let me strongly affirm that Europe must be united in rejecting any armed solution and must reaffirm its support for a political settlement in Libya among all the actors involved through dialogue promoted by the United Nations. For far too long, the Union has been a passive onlooker with respect to the southern shore of the Mediterranean, leaving the action to individual countries or groups of member countries. The most blatant case is migration. On this point, dear colleagues, the opposing stances of countries with or without an external border have prevailed over the need for a structural solution, a structural response. Too much emphasis was placed on secondary movements. Too little attention has been paid on primary movements which affect the countries that have an external border, such as Italy, nor did we implement the principles of solidarity and fair burden sharing under Article 80 of the TFU, the Treaty on the Functioning of the Union. Migrations are an epochal phenomenon that can be managed in an orderly manner in compliance with international law only through common action along several axes. First of all, we must share responsibilities concerning migrants who reach Europe, especially by boat, both in terms of search and rescue and in terms of their ensuing management. Those who reach any member country, be they refugees or migrants, must become the responsibility of Europe as the whole. Therefore, the Dublin regulation must be superseded, not simply revised. We must forsake the current principle of the country of first entry. We must automatically redistribute asylum applicants among all member countries. The second axis would be full-fledged cooperation in controlling the external borders and in combating the trafficking of migrants, the trafficking of human beings, and enslavement in general. The third axis must be the creation of camps for the reception, assistance, and information to be managed by the European Union and by transit countries, preventing migrants from becoming the victims of unspeakable violence by traffickers of human beings and other actors. The fourth actors would be better coordination of national systems to integrate legal refugees and migrants. We need to establish minimum common standards in accordance with international law and the fundamental principles of the European legal system. We must support also in financial terms peace, democracy, and the rule of law in our southern partners and in other African countries. We must support their economic growth. We must improve their existential outlook. If we are to reduce primary movements, we need to address the causes, the root causes of migration, and an important contribution can be provided by institution-building initiatives to benefit the parliaments of those countries. In this respect, the Italian Chamber and Senate, the two houses of the Italian Parliament, together with the French National Assembly and the Senate, in cooperation with other European parliaments, we are completing a twinning project at European level to strengthen the capacities of the Tunisian Parliament in implementing the Constitution of 2014. These projects are virtuous. This is why I'm working on similar projects between the Chamber of Deputies and the parliaments of the Horn of Africa or the Sahel. New European funds are needed for this kind of projects. And this brings me to the forthcoming financial framework, which must reflect these priorities. We should retain the current proportion in the allotment of the funds of the neighborhood instrument, 2/3 for the southern neighbors, 1/3 for the eastern neighbors. But more than that, we need to step up the funds for managing migration. The current allocation, 35 billion from 2021 to 2027, is not enough because 2/3 of those funds would be allotted to the control of external borders. I believe that the amount and distribution of the allocations for the management of migration flows will reflect our underlying paradigm. On the one hand, the deleterious and deceptive paradigm of the no-way approach, or else the responsible, solidarity-based and fast-sighted approach. Which kind of Europe do we want to be? These issues are decisive for shaping the future of our continent. I expect all political forces and I expect the Spitzenkandidaten to spell out very clearly their programs in the run-up to the European elections. The electoral debate must focus more on the Union's external action. The Union must be capable to speak with a single voice, with a stronger voice. Let us therefore open a debate on the possibility for the Union to have a united representation within international organizations. It is already possible under the current treaties. We should start with a permanent EU seat within the UN Security Council, replacing the seats of individual member countries. Furthermore, what types of relations do we want with Russia? Last month, I delivered a speech before the Russian Duma, where I underscored the need for the Union to take a united stance based on an in-depth reflection on the setup of our continent, on the approach to the next rounds of enlargement, on relations between the Union and NATO and between Union and NATO and Russia. The same goes for relations with China. In the memorandum of the Belt and Road Initiative, it is written, black on white, that Italy will abide by the European principles, values, and rules. I have reaffirmed this concept to President Xi Jinping in a recent conversation, a recent meeting. We need to assert in our external relations, the core of our European identity. It is the respect for fundamental rights. In this connection, let me recall the letter that I've sent to all of you, my fellow presiding officers, on the case of Giulio Regeni, a European researcher that was kidnapped, tortured, and killed and murdered in Egypt. For 3 years, we've been asking Egypt to shed light on its security forces. Some of the members of the Egyptian security forces are currently under investigation in Italy. If we are to achieve a breakthrough in our political integration process, we need to go beyond our national egoisms, to go beyond not to focus on electoral deadlines, to take the long view. This vision cannot but lead to an external action which will be shared and common action, external action for the Union.
Ich danke recht herzlich dem.
Thank you to the President of the Italian Chamber of Deputies. You have also hinted at the African aspect and migration in his statement. Let us now move on to our debate. A total of 22 speakers have requested the floor. I will therefore limit your statements to 3 minutes so as to allow for sufficient time for everyone. We will start with the President of the Croatian President, Mr. Yanukovych.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to commend all my colleagues on their keynote speeches. The current geopolitical complexity, sometimes difficult to foresee, has set the Union's priority, and that is above all a secure and stable future of Europe. Strengthening its security requires Europe to consolidate its political space. And this includes Southeast Europe that has always been of strategic interest. In this context, Croatia emphasized the importance of the enlargement as one of the most successful EU policies. Because enlargement is important for the stability and resilience of Southeast Europe, but it is also of interest to the EU itself in political, security, and economic terms. It is an investment in peace, security, progress, and stability on the basis of shared values and for the benefit of European citizens. Therefore, our responsibility is to constantly strengthen European political support, commitment engagement in that region in order to avoid interference of other global actors. I'm glad that our Bulgarian, Austrian, and Romanian colleagues have recognized that and include the enlargement among the presidency priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, during its presidency, Croatia will support the European perspective and further enlargement, of course, through a credible, clear, strict, and fair accession process based on individual achievements, conditionality, and fulfillment of the set criteria. The same process that we have experienced ourselves. The European perspective has transformational power. Therefore, the Western Balkan strategy should be an additional incentive for countries to continue their processes of political and economic transformation with strong political will and real and long-term results. I hope that Southeast European countries will seize this opportunity and that we will all work together on their further and final integration. Thank you.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you, sir, also for your time discipline. Next, our Czech colleague has the floor, Radek Vondracek.
Noch einmal drücken, bitte. Excuse me, you must once more.
One more? It's better. I'm sorry. So, on behalf of Chamber of Deputies of Czech Republic's Parliament, I would like to contribute a little bit to this discussion. The topic is the European Union and its neighbors. With all respect to previous speakers, I would like to highlight one issue more, and I want to continue with the speech of previous speaker. It's enlargement process. We all represent parliaments. Parliaments are places of discussion, and discussion is parliament. So let's discuss the enlargement process of European Union. The Balkans are part of our continent. The Balkans are part of our common European history and hold a place in the future of our Union. We continue to support efforts to fulfill its strategic aim of becoming a member of the European Union. Balkan countries are already within Europe, and the Union is not complete without them. The Czech Republic, as a country actively supporting the enlargement process, is convinced that from the point of view of stability and security, both the Western Balkans and the European Union itself, it's important that the enlargement process continues in parallel with the debate on the future of European Union. First of all, the peace, stability, and prosperity of Balkans countries will have a positive long-term effect on the security and stability of the entire European continent. And access to the Union will drive the social and economic development of Western Balkans and give impulse to the reforms already underway. I mentioned our common history and experience just for that freedom, democracy, rule of law, and human rights are not automatically guaranteed by law. The principles must be critically accompanied, but Around the same time, the adaptive self-development in Western Balkans must be supported, should be supported. It's also time to acknowledge the authentic and meanwhile visible efforts of the individual Balkan states and progress in their regional relations with each other. It's not a matter of course. Would I look back into the difficult story, rather a miracle. Regional cooperation is value itself and can push forward many outstanding problems. So I still in limit. Thank you for your attention.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. Und das nächste in der Reihe.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker comes from one of the countries that I mentioned when I opened it, Montenegro. For a long time, it was a leading position, and I give the floor to President Brajovic.
Distinguished colleagues, the fact that speakers of the European Union parliaments have placed the focus of today's debate on the enlargement ahead of the elections to the European Parliament is especially important for Montenegro as a candidate country. In this way, Austria as a host country showed once again how important it is to talk openly about challenges and common opportunities while ensuring at the same time that we always believe in the European Union and what it represents for all of us. Anniversaries are always there to remind us of the essential value of certain political decisions. The decision made 15 years ago when admitting 10 new members to the EU is an example of a timely and strategic political decision. At the same time, we have to ask ourselves where these states would have been today and how would Europe look like if such a decision hadn't been made. We understand that the EU needs to eliminate causes of the crisis it is experiencing and also to consolidate itself internally. But we do not think that these problems will be solved by stopping or significantly slowing down the enlargement policy, which we see as the most successful policy of the EU. On the contrary, we believe that the consolidation process within the EU and joining of the countries which share the same values are two complementary processes, since they are mutually conditioned and must take place simultaneously if the EU wants to be a stronger, more efficient and a more attractive alliance for the existing and new members. If the EU sets aside the integration for a better time in the future, we will face the danger of different political influences which are contrary to the aims of the EU. This would result in weakening of Euro enthusiasm among candidate countries and creation of the beneficial conditions for the forces which cherish anti-European values. These consequences will be felt not only by our countries but by the Union itself. Therefore, we think that the enlargement process is a strategic path for the Montenegro, our region and the entire Europe. My country, Montenegro, for 7 years of its negotiations and 13 years since the renewal of its independence, has strengthened its stability, provided democratic, institutional and economic development, and achieved important progress in the European integration process. When it comes to the common foreign and security policy of the EU, Montenegro already behaves as if it were an EU member and joins its common positions without exception. We are devoted to the regional cooperation. We are ready to give our small yet not negligible contribution to the family of European nations. We have a millennium-long history. We have preserved our harmony. We have abundant natural resources. We are implementing important reforms for a better living standard of our countries. A membership of the Western Balkans in the European Union is important not only for strengthening stability of our countries, but for the entire European continent as well. The enlargement brings economic, social and security benefits both to the new and existing members. We are not asking for any shortcuts on the path towards the membership. We expect that after the elections, the EU will show a more active approach towards the enlargement issue. The more active approach must also be more realistic in order to continue promoting the idea of a united Europe. Thank you.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is from Macedonia, Ivo Prajovic, sorry. Mr. Dalak-Zaferi, you have the floor.
Thank you, distinguished Chairman, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The topic we are debating on today, the European Union and its neighbours, is of special importance to us candidate countries to full membership, since it reaffirms the open door policy for the countries of the Western Balkan region. This is even more important because this is the election year for the European Parliament, which is the foundation of democratic life, not only within the European Union, but the whole continent too. I believe that at the elections in May, the principles the European Union rests upon will triumph. And those principles are human rights and freedoms, the legal state and rule of law, peace and security as indivisible categories, and certainly solidarity. I believe you all are aware that the Republic of North Macedonia in the past couple of years has indeed made historical steps which have put us back on the Euro-Atlantic track. Clearly, I'm referring to the PRESPA agreement with which the almost 3 decades-long dispute with a neighboring Greece was overcome with the Republic of Bulgaria in 2017 and the Republic of Greece with 2018. With which we unblocked our path to the European Union and NATO. As you know, we in Western Balkans, we created history which we didn't learn from that or consolidate that. Therefore, historical mistakes are being again repeated, but I do believe that now we are overcoming it, even though in the region we now have opening issues such as relations between Pristina and Belgrade, but also the fact that only region we accepted that only through dialogue can solve the open issues and problems. And we all agree that from peace and stability in the Western Balkan also depends the peace and stability of Europe, the whole European Union. When we talk about good neighborly policies, we also must emphasize the regional cooperation where are included the member states of European Union and candidate states for becoming member of the European Union. And then that one such a format is the Adriatic Union initiative, where we have recently had a meeting in Budva, Montenegro. We, candidates for becoming member of European Union through regional cooperation, we can use more effectively and benefit from the experiences of the member states, especially with regard to the necessary social and economic reforms. And highly developed democratic societies, a functioning legal state, and a developed economy are a benefit for the countries in the region, but also are a benefit for the entire European Union. Dear colleagues, as I have already stressed, the Western Balkan region is not the same as it was a year or two ago. In those positive steps and outcomes also has the Brussels policy towards the region as a whole and each country individually. This policy, on the one hand, clearly shows that Brussels wants to integrate the region, and at the same time it very transparently indicates what each country should do to fulfill the so-called Copenhagen criteria in order to become a full member. This year, when elections are to be held within the European Union and the processes related to Brexit are in the spotlight too, it is expected that Brussels will devote much more attention to these issues. That is, they will be in the front line. In such a political reality, the good neighborly policy that manifests itself best through the accession process to the European Union and the validation of the progress of each country individually must continue. In this way, public support and mobilization is strength for the pro-European course in the candidate countries, while at the same time our responsibility as politicians to continue with the necessary reforms is increased. Let's not forget that the Western Balkans is culturally and civilizationally part of Europe, and in this context we have a saying, it's nice when it is whole. Thank you for the attention.
Zum nächsten Präsidenten, des litauischen Präsidenten Viktoras Pranckiettis.
Thank you, dear colleagues. The European Union should have a broad common approach to European neighborhood and its policy, and it should be based on the principles of understanding and benevolence. Although Lithuania is far away from the Mediterranean in geographical terms, migration constitutes an unprecedented challenge which requires concerted efforts by the EU institutions, member states, and international organizations. At the same time, we realize that democracy and stability in Southeast Europe creates a positive and cooperation-friendly environment for the entire European Union. However, The current challenge, we also face current challenges, but we should also not forget our previous commitments. This year, we are commemorating the 10th anniversary of the Eastern Partnership. Much has been achieved. We have signed association agreements with Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, one partnership agreement with Armenia, 3 visa facilitation agreements with associated partners, as well as regimes with Armenia and Azerbaijan. It is the ambitious Eastern Partnership agenda that has been shaped back in 2009 and that has led to the significant results of Eastern Partnership today. But as we rejoice our achievements, we should identify the objectives for the Eastern Partnership beyond 2020. It is important to ensure that the new strategic reflection is open and ambitious. We hope that it will be conducted through structured consultations, and that by the year 2019, it will translate into concrete results. That is a joint communication from the High Representative and the European Commission. We take the view that more advanced partners should be given a possibility of moving faster and further. This will in no way destroy the Eastern Partnership itself, but rather ensure that it does not translate into a lowest common denominator-based policy and that it responds to individual needs of every partner. We have to ensure appropriate financial support in the upcoming multi-annual financial framework and base this support according to the more for more principle. It is important to ensure even earlier engagement of the EU into the implementation of reforms in Eastern Partnership countries by avoiding a wait-and-see approach. And finally, we are concerned that so far there is no decision made concerning the upcoming Eastern Partnership Summit. We hope that it will be arranged by the incoming presidency of the Council of the EU in the nearest future. Thank you.
Ein neues Thema öffnet die östliche Partnerschaft.
Thank you. The Eastern Partnership, a new topic coming up, and we will continue with Hungary.
Tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim! Európa nyitva áll mindazok előtt, akik csatlakozni kívánnak hozzá.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Europe is open to all who want to join it. Isolation has not only caused weakness, it has also caused decline, said Robert Schuman, one of the founding fathers of EU. I quoted these words because enlargement of the EU is one of the fundamental issues today. The EU should open its doors not to illegal migrants from outside Europe, but to European countries awaiting their accession and European citizens who have so far been left outside. We must decide whether we continue the European success story of enlargement or choose to keep applicant countries outside. Every country liberated from communism set one goal for itself, high and clear, and this was to join the European Union, representing peace, security, economic growth and prosperity. Allow me to call your regard to the fact that no country in the communist bloc voluntarily chose this path after 1945. Accession was a win-win situation for those inside and for those joining. Both in 2004 and 2007, the EU was able to complete the enlargement and deepening at the same time, and the Lisbon Treaty was also enacted. Yet we cannot stop halfway through. Everyone must understand that the security and the stability of the West Balkan region is a matter of decisive importance for the whole of Europe, and the perspective of the EU membership carries a force that can effectively stabilize the political systems. As in his introductory remarks, Speaker Sobotka said, if we do not fill this geopolitical void, other countries will. Hungary is committedly pro-enlargement. It is important that the EU presidencies keep keep the issue on the agenda. This applies especially to the would-be European Commission, which must be renewed also in terms of its enlargement policy. Hungary hopes that in the next institutional cycle, the EU will be enlarged by Montenegro and Serbia. We support the launch of the accession talks with Albania and the Republic of North Macedonia in June. We support giving candidate country status this year to Bosnia-Herzegovina, and if Kosovo meets the EU conditions, we support visa liberalization. With Turkey, a pragmatic approach and a sincere and open dialogue is what we consider important. We must also mention the Eastern Partnership. For the time being, we are not talking of their membership perspective, but it is clear that the integration process has the same stabilizing power there as in the West Balkans. In line with the principle more for more, we support the approach according to which the partner countries must be most committed to Western integration should be given genuine European integration perspective. Eastern Partnership countries, however, must also honor their obligations and commitments under international and EU agreements, and at this point I am obliged to mention Ukraine, a country that unfortunately does not honor all its obligations because it has not amended its disputed legislation on education until the present day, in spite of the recommendations of the Venice Committee. We hope, however, that the disputed issues will be settled as soon as possible. Thank you.
Köszönöm szépen Kövér úrnak, majd pedig Spanyolország következik. The Spanish delegation has the floor.
Dear Chairman Sobotka, dear speakers, dear colleagues, this is a matter of tremendous relevance. One, it's about managing our external borders, which we have to deal with the migration crisis and the regional conflicts in the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. But we should overcome our purely Eurocentric approach, and we should have a different relationship with countries like Morocco, Lebanon, and Algeria. As of 2017, a drop in the number of mass arrivals reveals the success of European neighbourhood policy that offers a privileged relationship to the Union's partners in exchange for a mutual commitment to common values. And it encourages to deepen this avenue of cooperation in order to achieve more democratic, economically advanced societies. So we should try to work on the principles and on the values that we share with all the Mediterranean and the Eastern countries. The assemblies that work on the interparliamentary dimension and the macro-regional region, like the Interparliamentary Assembly for the Union or for the Mediterranean, where Spain works constantly, or also Euronest, where we work with the Eastern countries, where we are represented by our delegation of the European Parliament. We should not forget that we live in a more and more interconnected country where terrorism and the digital agenda, respect of human rights and migration require a cooperation framework that goes beyond the states of single states. Thank you very much.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you also for keeping to the time allocated to you. And next, the President of the French Senate has the floor.
Merci aux deux présidents.
First of all, thank you to the two presidents of the Austrian parliamentary chambers. I would like to briefly reflect on the neighborhood policy, also in light of the activities of the French Senate. Naturally, the Western Balkan countries are part of Europe, and they play an important role for the stabilization of Europe, of the European Union, and the influence of Europe in this region. But our activities here must be founded on the respect of the adhesion criteria, including respect of the rule of law and our fundamental principles, and based on the merits of each and the progress of each country. This is important also with regard to new accession talks in the short run. Our colleague from Montenegro has already spoken about this, just as the colleague from Northern Macedonia. But we have to be clear, we are European citizens, but we have to make sure that we do not open perspectives which are not followed by facts. As regards the neighborhood policy, especially on the southern shores of the Mediterranean, we're facing immense challenges. The president of the Spanish Senate just touched upon this. The population of Africa up until 2050 is destined to double in size. How can we face such a demographic development? We're mainly talking about intra-African migration. We're often talking about young people. This is something Africa cannot solve by its own. We need a stronger effort in Europe, development aid, support of governance, the fight against the illegal immigration and the likes have to be supported. We need a global common approach on both sides of the Mediterranean. If we do not find solidary and common answers to this, it will be difficult to fight against extremist developments. There will be a meeting of Senates of Europe between the 13th and 15th of June in Paris. This will be an occasion for colleagues from Senates from Europe and Africa in order to speak openly about future prospects. Thank you very much.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, insbesondere das Erwähnen.
Thank you very much. And thank you for referring to Africa in particular. And I think that the Africa Forum in December was a first starting point. And certainly this has helped the situation throughout Europe and is of significance for Europe as a whole. Let's continue with Bosnia. Mrs. Kristo.
Hvala vam lijepa, poštovani predsjedniče Sobotka. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to greet you on behalf of House of Representatives of Parliamentary Assembly of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as on my own behalf. Bosnia and Herzegovina began its EU accession process in 1997 when the BiH Council of Ministers set the political economic conditions with the EU for development of bilateral relations. Several major steps have also been made in this process. 2008, the SAA was signed, which was entered into force 2015. In 2016, we formally submitted a request for EU membership, after which we had the EU Commission's questionnaire. Then the last activity was the delivery of answers to additional questions. I must emphasize that we in BiH, despite all the challenges we face, we are unanimous regarding the position that membership of the EU is the future of our country. One of the biggest challenges we face is the amendment of electoral legislation, since the current situation presents a huge burden for overall relations in BiH. 6 months after the general elections, we're still in the process of implementing the election results and establishing executive power at the state and federal levels. As I've already said, on the EU integration path of BiH, there were some activities taken, but the challenges that we face today
lead us to repercussions for Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as to the lack of trust in institutions, procedures, and everything that makes things more functional, safe, and foreseeable. What I want to emphasize is that the negotiation process for each country joining and has joined the EU, and thus also for Bosnia and Herzegovina, is the building the state itself as an important experience. That's important as membership itself. Closing, I'd like to point out that EU, to include the Southeast European countries, and with regard to the geography of the EU, this is a more process of consolidation of EU territory than the enlargement process. And that has to happen as soon as possible, in my own opinion. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. The last speaker before the coffee break, because I think we deserve a coffee break now, will be the Albania President, Mr. Kucic.
Dear colleagues, speakers of Parliament, First, I would like to convey the Albanians' gratitude for the support that all EU member states have given and continue to give Albania and our region in carrying out deep reforms in the framework of EU integration. The European Council in June 2018 have considered the positive proposal of the Commission. Albania has taken important steps in addressing the 5 key priorities set by the Council. I would like to mention here briefly the justice reform successfully being implemented, which serves as a model for the other countries of the region. Albania has also taken important steps for the co-management of the immigrants' crisis. We have received more than 6,000 immigrants from countries in conflict. So the starting of accession negotiations does not mean membership, but it is the opportunity for you to monitor us more closely and more strictly. The negotiations process is very long, and it is based on the merits of each country. Enlargement does not mean not only a greater number of countries, member countries, but it means an investment in stability of the region. We know that the slowdown of this process might create the space and the vacuum for the influence of other factors undermining our European perspective. We believe that your evaluation based on our own achievements, and we hope that the same merits will be equally rewarded by having the same decisions for the candidate countries. Finally, I would like to add 2 more arguments. Albania is the only country in the region with 100% harmonization of its foreign policy to the EU common foreign and security policy. Albania has, and it will have a proactive role in the development, cooperation, stability and peace in the region. All surveys show that almost 90% of Albanians support Albania's EU perspective. Therefore, today I am here to ask on their behalf your support. I thank you.
Colleagues, the meeting is resumed. For the current debate, we have another 12 requests for the floor. You are asked to stick to the speaking limit of 3 minutes so that all speakers who have requested the floor can actually have a chance to make their statements. Vice President Carmen Elena Michalescu has the floor.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. You already know that we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Eastern Partnership, and that happens during the first Romanian presidency of the Council of European Union, well, like us. Romania will further support the efforts of our partners to come closer to the EU each at its own pace and accordingly to their political ambitions or aspirations. On a political note, continued engagement towards all our partners must remain our strategic objective, and 2019 should mark the beginning of a reflection period of the future of EAP. Romanian presidency will encourage a positive approach, a reflection process leading to an updated political agenda to be endorsed at the next summit. Allow me to talk a little bit, just two more ideas about the southern neighborhood, because it's very important for all of us. And I would like to tell you that Romania is fully attached to the strong partnership with the partner states in our southern neighborhood and is engaged in furthering the overall relations around the Mediterranean. Romania believes that the only viable, realistic alternative is a two-state solution with Palestine and Israel living in peace and security. The EU will continue to make sure that the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East gets the funding it needs. And while the European Union and its member states are by far the largest donors for this organism, this agency, we are also encouraging the rest of the international community to increase their contributions. Including as EU Council presidency, Romania fully supports the Brussels Third Conference, addressing the most critical humanitarian and resilience issue affecting Syrians and communities hosting Syrian refugees, both inside the country and in the region. Also, we deeply appreciate the first EU League of Arab States Summit in February in Sharm el-Sheikh. More than a huge symbolic message that we send to the world, the summit represented, first of all, a further proof that we can all work together and we can answer together to the present challenges, and second, that we can cooperate for advancing our political and sustainable development agenda. I have no more time, so unfortunately I cannot tell you more, but I'm sure this evening I will have the chance to talk to at least.
Vielen Dank für Ihren Beitrag.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Next on the list of speakers is Tsvetna Karayankeva. You have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, dear Madam Vice President of the European Parliament, dear colleagues, I would like to convey to you the cordial greetings of the Bulgarian parliamentarians, with whom in a few days we will mark 140 years since the adoption of the first Bulgarian constitution, a historical event which paved the way for our country towards the modern European statehood. Nowadays, our union is going through hard and turbulent years. Security, new demonstrations of populism, Brexit, and the migration wave have dramatically changed the European mindset and put European values into a new context. But Europe is not in a deadlock, situation. Europe today is facing the need for a strategic debate for the future of the European project. I'm joining everything said so far by our colleagues. As good friends, we must share our concerns, and I will discuss a topic which has been the subject of hot debates in my country. Last week, the European Parliament adopted at first reading the mobility package. Bulgaria is amongst the countries which will be affected negatively by the planned changes. These changes threaten an entire industrial sector and will put to test over 60,000 Bulgarian households and families, which will feel the effect of this new legislation. Dear colleagues, solidarity and the pursuit of reasonable consensus should not give way to division, and this is division not under a partisan principle, but under a national principle. No policy of the EU should leave a bad taste for restrictive and disproportional and protectionist measures which contradict the main principles of the EU and the common European approach. Division into center and periphery, as well as Europe on two speeds, are unacceptable. 11 years after Bulgaria joining the EU and after presiding the Council of the EU, our country has placed as its main priority the EU perspective of the Western Balkans. We did it with a clear understanding that this is a geostrategic investment into a stable, solid, and strong and united Europe. Dear colleagues, I will conclude with a message that the road ahead and the success of the European policy for good neighborhood depends on the speed with which we carry out policies focused on connectivity in all dimensions: transport, energy, infrastructure, digital economy, better connections between businesses and people to people, including young people, educational institutions, and representatives of the civil society. Thank you for your attention.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin, für
Thank you, Madam President, for your contribution. Next, Daniel Günther, you have the floor.
Ja, sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Distinguished colleagues, for a number of years, we've seen that our European construction has been put into question. This is also linked to developments outside of the EU. Aggressive territorial politics seem to have gained ground on in European countries. Differences in prosperity have led to migration pressure also on the external borders of Europe. In addition, nowadays, we also have a fundamental societal change which we have to face. Digitalization, artificial intelligence lead to fear of loss of jobs and the likes. This has been existing next to the normal European challenges. Nationalist and protectionist ideas have been flourishing in this context and have been increasing pressure on the European Union and its neighbors. I think it is time for us to have a very firm attitude also with regard to Turkey, the municipal elections and the attitudes of the government of Turkey. And we would welcome a clear signal towards the Turkish government and the Turkish AKP party to recognize the outcome of the elections. And we will also prepare a suggestion for our final conclusions. I'm convinced, colleagues, that as European Union we have to find a joint position about all this. The fight against the root causes of migration is one of the central tasks for us. We have to give people a real perspective in their home countries by avoiding wars and violence, by consolidating peace processes, by supporting the development of solid structures, by fighting poverty, climate change, and the likes. This will allow us to fight against the root causes of migration and to spread the basis for prosperity and peace. Fighting against these developments on site is one way, but we also have to treat those people who come to Europe in a humane way, and therefore we urgently need European rules for migration, and we have to fairly divide the burdens. Small countries and provinces can also do their part. My land has just approved the project in this area, and we also have to protect our external borders efficiently so that the Schengen area can be conserved as one of the main achievements of our European integration process. Ladies and gentlemen, as regards the Western Balkan countries, yes, they do need a European perspective. The German Länder explicitly confirm this and support this, and I'm convinced that a strong European Union can also fight the centrifugal tendencies that are there by concentrating and focusing on joint policies by fighting tendencies against this and by making sure that we have long-lasting stability. Thank you, sir, for your words. Next, the President of the Swedish Parliament, Andreas Norlén, you have the floor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, thank you. Thank you. The Swedish Parliament welcomes the Commission's renewed focus on the enlargement of the European Union. Enlargement has helped strengthen security, democracy and economic development in Europe, and it remains an important instrument for promoting stability and economic development in our neighbourhood. Continued focus on countries who have committed to EU integration through special arrangements is crucial for the credibility of the EU's enlargement policy. We should therefore continue to support the EU integration efforts of our neighbours in the Western Balkans. The principles of conditionality and progress on our own merits should form the basis of the continuing process. Contributing to an open Europe, including support for a positive development in our eastern and southern neighbourhood, is a challenge for the entire European Union. Sweden and the Swedish Parliament also supports the development of a closer relationship with the countries in the Eastern Partnership, for which an ambitious EU strategy is very much needed. Such a strategy should deliver long-term support, including development assistance for partner countries. And I would like to stress, for instance, the importance of support for democratic institutions, for instance, parliament-to-parliament support. Cooperation in the field of energy security should also be strengthened. These partnerships should be based on mutual commitments for the rule of law, good governance, respect for human rights, including the rights of minority groups, and the principles of market economy and sustainable economic development. A membership perspective should be extended to partner countries in Europe who are willing to carry out ambitious political and economic reforms. Let me also mention the Parliamentary Assembly of the Union for the Mediterranean, which have been mentioned previously in this discussion. The Swedish Parliament, or rather I, with the support of the parties of the Swedish Parliament, have decided not to appoint a delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Union of the Mediterranean for the coming period. We find serious organizational shortcomings regarding different areas of the work of this organization, for example, the plenary sessions and the committee proceedings, and we wish to state our dissatisfaction by not appointing a delegation. We of course hope that we may resume our participation in this organization in the future because it is important for Europe and the European Union to engage in discussions with its partners around the Mediterranean. But on the whole, the Swedish Parliament welcomes integration and a membership perspective for our friends all over Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President, for your words. And the next speaker is the President of the Serbian National Assembly, Mrs. Maja Gojković, and I give you the floor.
Kolege, zaista se zahvaljujem na postavljanju važne teme susjedstva Evropske unije na prvo mesto današnje konferencije. To nama državama, kandidatima za članstvo, daje i nadu i ohrabrenje da ostajemo u fokusu politika Evropske unije uprkos izazovima sa kojima se Evropska unija danas suočava.
Despite all the challenges facing the Union, Serbia is participating in all the challenges facing the EU. And it has particularly proved its big role in migrant crisis. Moreover, we invest additional efforts in our own reforms and in harmonization with EU standards. We are doing this in order to add value and make contribution to the EU in one of its most successful policies, the enlargement policy. Our full commitment to the integration process is based on our belief that all the efforts, which may sometimes include difficult and painful measures, are in the best interest of our region citizens, but also in the interest of the EU. This is why it is important that the perspective of full membership for the Western Balkans is credible, with visible goals set by a stable and strong EU, having regard to the principles and values on which this great and unique project is founded. As a speaker of an EU candidate country, I would like to emphasize that the Republic of Serbia is committed to dialogue and cooperation on all open issues in our region, because this is the only way to tackle problems, to preserve stability, and to create a safe future for our citizens. Distinguished colleagues, having in mind that the Republic of Serbia is the only republic that has Chapter 35 within its EU accession negotiations, Serbia expects EU to as a facilitator of Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, to influence the withdrawal of the decision on introducing taxes on the Serbian products and products from Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is an illegal measure that Pristina has been implementing for 6 months, and if there is a clear attitude on this measure, would send a clear message that unilateral radical measures are unacceptable, and it would enable continuation of the dialogue aimed at achieving a mutually acceptable solution. I'd like to emphasize that Serbia is ready to continue the dialogue, regardless of the fact that we have been waiting for a long time for the other part to fulfill its obligations from the Brussels Agreement. We are convinced, distinguished madams and gentlemen, that only with the Western Balkans as its integral part, the EU can be unique, complete, and safe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And the next speaker is the President of the Latvian Parliament, Mugnitse. And you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, I will address two themes: Eastern Partnership and Western Balkans. Latvia is among strong supporters of the Western Balkans European perspective. Indeed, the merit-based accession process is a driver of transformation of the region. We welcome the historic step taken by Greece and North Macedonia by concluding the Prespa Agreement. Reform commitment and progress achieved has to be acknowledged by the EU, in particular by taking a decision to open accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania in June. Continued reform progress in the rule of law, efforts towards genuine freedom of expressions, freedom of media, foreign policy alignment, and good neighborly relations are important for transforming European aspirations of the Western Balkan countries into reality. The largest Eastern Partnership country, Ukraine, now is in our focus. We welcome the fact that the first round of presidential elections has taken place according to international standards. It is important to keep up the international standards also in the second round. Last year, I visited eastern Ukraine. Once again, I had to witness security challenges caused by Russian aggressive actions. 5 years have passed since illegal annexation of Crimea, and nothing has changed. Russia has failed to honor the Minsk agreement. On the contrary, tension has risen in the Sea of Azov. Our position is firm. Security of Ukraine is our security. We cannot and should not stay silent. Last December, the Parliament of Latvia adopted a declaration voicing strong support for Ukraine's territorial integrity, asking Russia to free Ukrainian ships and release the Ukrainian sailors. We are also concerned about the condition of Crimean Tatars in the occupied Crimean Peninsula. I'm convinced Ukraine needs consistent support from all EU allies. Since the Euromaidan 5 years ago, Ukraine has achieved considerable progress in the reform process, despite the challenges they are facing. Meanwhile, it is important to continue the reforms, particularly in anti-corruption and justice sectors. Encouragement and support from the international community to continue reforms is crucial. One more thing. Our security begins in the minds of people. We need to strengthen our ability to protect democratic values. We see that Kremlin, in its information war, targets all of us living within the EU, in Western Balkans, or in the Eastern Partnership countries. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And the next speaker is the Vice President of the Senate of Romania, Mrs. Duina Elena Fedorovici.
Distinguished colleagues, dear friends, first of all, I would like to congratulate the hosts for organizing this conference, gathering together the speakers of the European Union Parliament, and provides a platform for debate on the major topics of the agenda. To promote peace, stability, and economic prosperity in the whole region, and to support political and economic reforms in Europe's neighboring countries, are the goals and objectives of the European Union's neighborhood policy. 2019 marks the 10th anniversary of the EU's Eastern Partnership, through which the EU worked with its southern and eastern neighbors to achieve the highest political association and the greatest degree of economic integration. Over the past decade, the collective efforts of the European Union and the partner countries have brought considerable benefits to the citizens, including more mobility, an increased economic development, and better quality of life. During the Romanian presidency of the Council of the European Union, we celebrate 10 years since the launch of the Eastern Partnership, and it is an occasion to reflect on the progress and to contribute to more ambitious targets. Within different forms of gathering of the Romanian presidency are explored the possibilities offered by this partnership, and I assure that we will further support the efforts of our partners from neighborhood to come closer and to support the European values and norms, each at its own pace and accordingly to their political aspirations. Romania is seeking to implement and to communicate the real deliverables of the targets planned until 2020 and to generate a process of reflection on post-2020 goals. The final statement by the co-presidency adopted within the Interparliamentary Conference for Common Foreign and Security Policy and the Common Security and Defense Policy, hosted by Romania a month ago, reiterated the shared EU's commitments to the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the Eastern Partnership countries, as well as our belief in the need to keep focus on the reform agenda in these countries by applying the more for more principle. For this reason, a more ambitious Eastern Partnership Plus is an option for the countries who are ready to take more firm and constant steps in order to project in the region a climate of democratic stability and economic progress. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am convinced that we, as European Union and member states, together with our neighbors, we will continue to further strengthen our partnerships for the benefit benefit of all and for a safe and prosperous life of all our citizens. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vize.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The next speaker is the President of the Estonian Parliament. You have the floor, sir.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I want to thank the Austrian Parliament for the excellent organization of the EU Speakers Conference. This year, Estonia celebrates 15 years of membership in NATO and the EU. It was a dream come true for all those who fought for our independent statehood. 50 years of NATO membership have reinforced our security, while 50 years of EU membership have increased our prosperity and welfare. We still remember what it was like to be behind the door, closed or open. This is why we sympathize with all those who share our passion for Europe and its real values. Many of you have underlined the need to keep the European dream alive for the countries of Western Balkans, and I agree with you. Let me, on my part, focus on the eastern flank. On the 10th anniversary of the EU Eastern Partnership Programme, it continues to be a priority for Estonia, both in the EU foreign and security policy and in bilateral development cooperation. Over the years, the Eastern Partnership has proved to be an efficient and dynamic framework. We should like to express support for the reforms of Eastern Partnership countries and provide a perspective for further development of relations. In doing so, we support as individual approach as possible based on the more for more principle. At the same time, it's important to involve all partners focusing on areas of particular interest to them. In bilateral cooperation, Estonia pays attention to the public administration reform, promotion of e-government and digital cooperation, education, business environment, fight against corruption, and the development of civil society in the Eastern Partnership countries. It is important to pay attention to increasing the resilience of partner countries, strengthening the strategic communication, and improving the visibility of the EU. We are determined to continue our work jointly and in a spirit of close cooperation to develop the Eastern Partnership agenda beyond 2020, ensuring that we will remain stronger together. Thank you for your attention.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is Mr. Dimitris Silouris of the Cypriotic Chamber of Deputies. You have the floor, sir.
Chairman, thank you for hosting us and for organizing this meeting. And I would like to wish us all great success, but also to congratulate the Austrian Parliament for the next conference that it will be organizing on the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union. In 2020, it will be hosting the IPU. The development of the relations of the EU with the countries of the wider neighborhood and the strategies that are being implemented in the overall neighborhood provide the role that it can play in the international global arena, that the EU can play. Cyprus is always a supporter of those strategies, since the implementation of their goals adds value to the efforts to tackle common challenges such as managing the migrant flows, fighting terrorism and its funding, as well as implementing international law and the community acquis, which means that they enhance the security and safety of the EU by enhancing the security of the overall region. Beyond that, Cyprus being in the southeastern flank of Europe and playing the role of a bridge of dialogue and cooperation between the Middle East and the EU, is making initiatives of regional cooperation in order to contribute constructively to energy security of Europe and to other initiatives in various other fields through agreements at the bilateral and multilateral level with the participation of Greece, Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. The Parliament of Cyprus, for its part, the National Assembly of Cyprus, has tried to participate in trilateral cooperations at the levels of presidents of parliaments with the countries that I just mentioned. Cyprus can contribute to the EU the knowledge and the relationships that it has in the wider region of the Middle East. Nevertheless, at this point, I also have to mention the continued aggressions of Turkey within the exclusive economic zone of Cyprus, which actually question the strategic goals of Cyprus and of Europe as a whole. And at the same time, I would like to thank the European Union for supporting Cyprus. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, für Ihr Statement.
Thank you, sir, for your statement. The next speaker is the Sejm Marshal from Poland, Stanislav Kaszewski.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Chairman of the Austrian Parliament, for a wonderful welcome in Vienna. Poles are amongst the nations which have an enthusiastic approach to the integration in our continent within the EU. We support the accession process for the Western Balkan countries, which is already in progress, and also the policy of open doors, considering all those countries of the Eastern Partnerships, like Ukraine, Georgia, or Moldova, have an ambition to become membership countries. And all of this is happening because we do have the awareness that the extension of the European Union and including new countries in the EU would change the direction of transfer of money in the European Union when it comes to regional and agricultural policy. However, this approach is not very common within the entire EU. A fatigue with the extension is a fact, especially in the countries of the so-called Old 15. The EU, however, does not have a more efficient tool to influence others than creating a perspective for welcoming other countries from the neighborhood. There are certain costs of activities and costs of ignorance. The costs of closing the EU for further countries would extend many times the open door policy approach. A third policy that does not cost nothing simply does not exist. The political vacuum would be filled with Russia, which is aggressive towards the EU and exports destabilization and corruption. We do not want to see such countries in the neighborhood of the EU. The European Union, when it comes to our neighbors, has to face many challenges. Challenge number one, the countries of Western Balkans are in the process of the Berlin process and have a clear way to the accession. They have to follow this path, and the EU has to make it easier for them. Greece, while entering the agreement in Prespa with Northern Macedonia, gave us an example of how we should support this process. So we owe them for this political act of wisdom, respect. The second challenge. Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia do not have a roadmap similar to the Balkan one. The association agreement and the agreement for deeper trade cooperation have expired the current offer of the EU. If we maintain the European course of this country, we have to reinforce our offer, and we need to add new challenges. If we are to find such instruments, we need to put this on the to-do list. Without this, the destabilizing influence of Russia and the European Union will only increase. Russia as a neighbor is a separate challenge. As long as it is a source from which aggression spreads towards the neighbors, it has to be subject of EU sanctions. Its political message cannot be hidden under such projects like Nord Stream 2. Such projects are contradictory to the values and the security of the European Union. The challenges in the southern neighborhood are of immigrational character and have a major influence on the political climate and electoral climate in many countries of the EU. The destabilizing role of Russia in Syria and Libya highlight the unity of European security area. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Marschall, für Ihren Beitrag.
Thank you very much for this contribution. And the next request for the floor is by the President of the Slovene National Assembly. President Ishan, you have the floor.
First of all, allow me now to state that in Slovenia we firmly believe in the European Union. We agree with all those who were talking about migration. The problem of migration is a common issue where we need to be united and efficient. But moreover, we need to tackle the reasons for it. Migrations can be achieved and in the means of peace processes of Europe. We can tackle them only if the European Union is helping the agricultural and also the economic production, that we help those countries in fighting against climate change. All other issues are only utopic. We are strongly supporting the countries of the Western Balkan region to continue with the process of accessing the European Union because they belong to the European Union. Sometimes it is very hard to see how a bit protective some high officials of the European Union are on the Western Balkans, and they are giving different promises month in, month out to the Western Balkans. If the expectations are not clear, then they can perceive it as not being frank in their intentions. It is pivotal that we make a decisive step in June in Brussels. We are very much in favor of the process which Greece and the Republic of North Macedonia concluded, and we are aware that this is only one of the needed processes in that region. So the enlargement of the European Union is not only dependent whether the countries of the Western Balkan Unions do what we wish or not, but it is mostly dependent if we are able to state our clear wishes, to state our clear standards without being overprotective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And now I would like to call on the last speaker on the list to give his statement. This is the President of the Luxembourg Assembly, President Fano Edgen, and I give you the floor, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. President, dear colleagues. I'm very happy to be here for the first time here because, and when we speak about the European Union and the extension process, and this means that the European parliaments can also do something in this respect. And in my opinion, they must first of all, and first and foremost, identify in what areas the parliaments have the biggest potential in order to promote things. Can we really do something in this connection? And the reply is quite easy, even if the implementation is not immediate for the European parliaments, but in the parliaments we have more. We are very much aware and sensitive, and at the same time we have the unique expertise as far as democratic values are concerned. So this institutional expansion is the best form of direct democracy. So it is the mission to regulate to have good relations between the majority and the opposition. And if this is an institutionalized way for the opposition and also for the minorities in our period where the law of the majority very often is essential. And it is not necessary today. I think that it is not so obvious anymore. And this requirement, this democratic requirement, depends finally also on the shared values and the rights and the freedoms. And that's the reason why we in the European Union and with our neighbors must, in my opinion, strengthen even more the interparliamentary relations through cooperation projects, very specific projects, in the way with the goal of democracy and parliamentary dialogue. And I think, for example, that seminars should be held on topics for parliamentarians and also to train administrators accordingly. We must have better relations to universities on the initiatives by the heads of parliaments, and we should implement, for example, as we do it in Luxembourg. Dear colleagues, in Luxembourg, we are open to the idea of enlarging the European Union by admitting new member states on the condition that all the criteria are respected, and in particular the chapters linked to democracy and the rule of law and justice. At the same time, it is very important to give a perspective, a credible perspective, and not only to give unrealistic promises. I would want you to take the floor, Mr. President, but let me conclude by a final message. In order to be successful and in order to remain credible regarding in relation to our neighbors, it is indispensable that the member states of the European Union respect themselves quite expeditiously all the requirements of democracy and subscribe and attribute that also to the member states who want to become members of the European Union. And this means that the process of enlargement and the neighborhood policy, here it would be unacceptable to formulate requirements that run contrary to that and to follow up anything where the new members would not be able to benefit from the European values, and these are the most important ones written down in the treaties. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, President, for your comment. And I would like to thank all speakers for their contributions. I now would like to give the floor back to the three introductory speakers. They have about 4 minutes each. And President DANKO, you're the first one to take the floor.
Poďakovať všetkým diskutujúcim, že sme sa naprieč všetkým vystúpeniam zhodli v tých istých témach a tou hlavnou témou je rozširovanie Európskej únie o štáty, akými sú Čierna Hora.
And that is the enlargement process concerning Serbia, concerning Montenegro. I want to thank all the presentators that this has been the common denominator in the presentations. You have touched upon the security issue, digital agenda, and it is important that we have here top representatives of the European Parliament. It's a pity that I have been able to be with the President of the European Parliament only once. Hopefully, the situation will improve in the future. You know, I've been here for the 4th time now. I think that this is a platform for really pinpointing the problem, but often we just treated in a diplomatic way, and I believe that Brexit is the lack of success that can be attributed to all of us.
Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And President VOUTSIS, you have the floor now.
It is significant that in the interventions that we heard the various issues that are on the agenda, and issues were raised of regional interest. It is clear that there is a wider consensus on the issue of the enlargement, in particular with regards to the Western Balkan countries that have been following the roadmap of the various chapters and the enhancement of partnerships. So we can we are examining the chapters, we are helping the countries regardless of the phase in which they find themselves, so that there can be convergences, social convergences, economic convergences, and so that they can be provided with new opportunities. And there is also an issue that has to do with enlargement as well, and it was quite obvious that one should take into account to a great extent the issue of stability in every region. A political criterion, basically. With what regards the migrant and refugee flows, this very serious issue, I find that very correctly the idea was analyzed and presented to tackle the root causes long-term with specific policies, so that these people will be allowed to stay and be happy in their homelands. Also, it was pointed out that there is a need for burden sharing, responsibility sharing of all the countries, and to tackle these responsibilities with common solidarity policies on this issue, and also to respect international safeguards with the values of the EU for the very refugees and migrants themselves, to the extent that they do arrive and stay with us for as long as they do and are integrated in our societies. Dear colleagues, allow me to tell you that on these two issues that are at the heart of many other issues as well of the EU, an EU that is at a transitional point and facing an identity crisis, one would say, we need to examine in an open way and in a modern way how to put an end to these issues, how they shouldn't form a part of the problem. They shouldn't create problems. We should find a way to tackle them and address them so that they are issues that will be organic elements that will allow us to find solutions and to enhance our identity and our entities and our EU as a whole in its international roles. We should not be conservative and inward-looking and have very short horizons. We should be broad in our addressing all these issues. The EU can play an important role at a planetary, global level with the new differences that have been raised through the progress of technology, digitalization, for example, that has been mentioned. And we should make it a force for the EU to tackle issues through the enlargement, through social convergence, through a new architecture for the EU itself, enhance democracy, but also attach a more humane aspect to the way we address issues, renew our values vis-à-vis the tens of millions of people in our peripheries and regions, in our neighborhoods, people who are affected by the consequences of interventions, of wars, of fundamentalism, of conflicts, for which situations the EU shouldn't feel that it bears no responsibility and is outside the problem. The EU, through its responsibility, can become more credible in the hearts and in the beliefs of the people of Europe. And in this sense, I agree fully with you that by forging such an agenda, we can be frank and direct towards the European citizens and ask them to come and vote in the European elections and to forge themselves the developments so that we can exit the crisis. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. President Fico, you have the floor.
Let me thank all the colleagues who've taken the floor, who have addressed all the issues related to the role that the European Union wishes to play in its external action in Europe, in the Mediterranean, in the world. Let me reaffirm that the decisions that the European Union will take should be based on two preconditions. First, we should assert European identity and European values, respect in all cases without any hesitations for the fundamental rights and the rule of law in our relations with our partners, including neighboring countries and candidate countries. The second point is the need to move forward in the integration process, and this calls for the European Union to be able to speak with a single voice at international level. Let me now move on to the first of the issues that were touched upon during the debate, that is to say the outlook for the forthcoming rounds of enlargement. In order to decide who, when, and how some countries shall join the Union, we should avoid to repeat the mistakes of the past and think about the impact of new enlargements on international equilibria and on the core of founding values of the European Union. We need to be more strict than we were in the past on the rule of law, the protection of minorities, the protection of disabled people, freedom of the press, non-discrimination based on sexual orientation. And we should also avoid accelerating the process of enlargement without due reflection. Any new enlargement should be based on a review of the procedures and the majorities, the current majorities envisaged for decision-making within the Council in order to go beyond the veto power of individual countries or groups of countries. We need to enhance the macro-regional perspectives of the Eastern neighborhood, and I'm recalling here the Berlin process as a fundamental process. European Union at world level, major global challenges make it imperative to adopt a united strategy, a consistent strategy. Individual countries cannot go it alone. European action, for example, will be fundamental in the Arctic region. We must ensure that the environment is protected. We must ensure sustainable development, international cooperation, the rights of the native populations, their economies, local economies, and local resources, because that region is suffering from the impact of climate change. One final remark relating to the remarks of the Speaker of the Swedish Parliament on the Parliamentary Assembly of the Union for the Mediterranean. We are going to establish a permanent secretariat based in Rome, and we are going to overcome the difficulties that you mentioned, and I hope that all member countries will be able to make a tangible contribution to the successful functioning of the new secretariat. Thank you.
Herr Präsident, herzlichen Dank.
La ringrazio, Presidente.
Präsidentin.
Thank you, sir, for your words. Dear colleagues, presidents, I would like to thank you again for this lively discussion. Your comments and your contributions have been highly interesting, and I'm convinced that this debate has been very useful for all of us. With this, we're at the end of our first day.